Rain down on us and be with us in this place. Share your love among us that we may walk your way, listening for your voice whispering to us in the darkness. Hold our hands and lead us through the season of Lent as we await the passion of Good Friday and the glory of Easter morning. Amen. Well, the lectionary was not easy on me this morning. It gave me 40 verses to read, and I feel like I need a cup of water now after reading that. But we have a tough passage this morning. It has a lot of layers and has a lot of avenues and rabbit holes that we can venture down. But we have to remember this is the whole point of John's writing style. John is concerned with layering symbolism, having every time that somebody reads a text from John, that they draw a new meaning from it. But if we were to compare this story to the other healing stories of people who are experiencing blindness in the Synoptic Gospels, the only aspect of John's story that they share is that Jesus does a miracle in front of people to a person who is experiencing the physical loss of sight. Everything else is different. All aspects that drive the narrative in John are not found in the Synoptics. For example, the detail of the man being blind from birth, the fact that Jesus uses mud, Jesus orders a man to go somewhere else in order to be cleansed, the interrogations of the Pharisees, and the questioning of the crowd are not found in any of the Synoptic Gospels, representing a healing of a person who was blind. So, keeping this in mind, we have to accept that these details are there for a reason and provide us with a clue to one message that John is letting us hear today. The plot is set in motion by a traditional scene transition in verse 1. Jesus and the disciples were walking on a road. Thanks for that lovely description, John. But we presume that Jesus and the disciples are walking to Jerusalem because, as John with the other synoptic gospels, everything climaxes in the crucifixion right before the resurrection. The disciples, characteristic to their roles as students of Jesus, asked the question about a person experiencing blindness in their entire life, begging for help of any kind. The disciples are asking a theological question about the role of sin in a person's life. And this is a very uncomfortable subject for many to talk about sin in their lives because it has a negative connotation to it. But the disciples are going to teach us a very important lesson. Their question is based on the retributive notion of sin, which was a common theme in the Hebrew Bible and of that time period. You did something wrong, something bad happened to you. It was a cause-effect style of that belief. They ask, Jesus, either this person or someone in their family must have sinned, or else their blindness wouldn't have happened. Is this correct? In turn, as I imagine, Jesus turns to them and says, this person or no one in their family has sinned. But I want to take this moment to teach you all something regarding this. I want you to watch what unfolds with this person and myself. Then we get to our first hurdle in the text, of which there are many, but this is the first. Then Jesus goes over to this person, spits on the ground, and rubs mud in the person's eyes, and orders this person who is not only experiencing blindness, but now has mud in their eyes, to walk over somewhere and bathe. I could just see the disciples standing in the background with their jaws on the ground, completely dumbfounded. saying something like, "Jesus, what are you doing? You just rubbed mud in this poor man's eyes, and he's already blind, and you're asking him to walk over there." We aren't told how the person experiencing blindness gets to the river, or how they get back, or if anybody helps them. All we know is that they went, washed, came back, and was able to see. Upon the person's return is when the drama unfolds further, and we see John's masterful storytelling come to the forefront. From here on out in the passage, for the most part, the rest of it follows a three-part cycle. The first step of the cycle is questioning. Sadly, some of the people surrounding this person, called their neighbors, cannot recognize this person without their ailment. Despite this person's repetitive, it's me, I promise it's me," all the people knew this person for was their blindness. The neighbors, quote unquote, pushed this person's repetitive pleading of identity aside and gave this person their first interrogation. And it was not a very joyous occasion either. It's not like a miracle just happened right in front of them. In true interrogative fashion, the crowd says, "How did this happen to you?" The only thing missing with this question is a Law and Order theme song and a light shining directly in this person's eyes. The person has no option but to answer, and they relatively quickly do, which leads to the second part of the cycle. The second part of the cycle is the person who was blind designates a relationship to Jesus. In their answer, you can almost hear the panic in their voice. The person says, "The person who healed me, they called Jesus." The person who was literally just healed by Jesus will not claim a direct relationship with Jesus. The person has to use an outside resource, they, to give an identity to Jesus. It's almost as if they were to say, "It was just some guy, I don't know him, they said his name was Jesus." And this brings us quickly to the third part of the cycle, where the person issues a faith statement. The part of the crowd that's questioning him sharply says, "Where did he go?" And he responds, "I don't know." This means that he doesn't even want to claim enough of a relationship to Jesus to even know in which direction he was headed. Now, I'm going to pause the story, and I have to admit something here. If it were me in that context, and they asked me in that tone, "Where did he go?" I would have had to have said, "I don't know. I didn't see where he went. Y'all the ones with the perfect vision. I just got mine back." This crowd doesn't believe this person, so they take him to the Pharisees for more questions. This cycle of interrogation, designation, and a faith statement continues to happen to this person who experienced blindness 2 more times. However, in the second and third cycle of questions, something remarkable happens in the designation and the faith statement sections of the cycle. The person who experienced blindness is taken to the Pharisees for round 2 of this intellectual boxing match. Except during the time of interrogation, the language used by the Pharisees is much more derogatory in nature. The Pharisees ask the elementary and entry questions, asking this person to explain how they received their sight. So once again, the person explains themselves by saying, Jesus stuck mud in my eye, told me to walk, and washed in the river, and now I see. But instead of getting pressed for more information about this healing, the Pharisees bypassed the miracle completely and used this person as a way to accuse Jesus of sinning, because Jesus did not honor the Sabbath. However, the person who is no longer blind changes his relationship with Jesus in light of hearing this accusation. He elevates his relationship with Jesus by declaring Jesus a prophet. The Pharisees, still caught on their first judgment of Jesus, send for a grown person's parents. How low of a blow can you get? This was their attempt to embarrass and quell the person's claim of Jesus' parenthood. And, as any parent of a grown person would do, they look at the Pharisees after being summoned and roll their eyes and say, ask them yourself, we ain't speaking for them, they're grown. So in frustration and in a last-ditch effort, they summon the person who is blind for one last effort to find the truth of what happened, even though it is right in front of them. The Pharisees start picking on the person who was blind, cornering this person like a wolf about to attack, gnashing their teeth and snarling the exact same questions that everyone has been asking and they themselves have asked before. The Pharisees label this person his disciple, in an attempt to insult and hurt the person. However, instead of being hurt by this comment, the cornered person who was blind takes on this label and defends his new faith in Jesus so well that they have no other choice but to throw him out. Now we come to the story where the literary artist of John breaks the cycle of triplets for one more dialogue that solidifies Jesus' character in true Johannine fashion. Jesus finds the person and asks them about their faith, just like everyone has been doing all day and just like everyone before him, but in a much more endearing and nicer tone. The person who is blind replies with an earnest plea that is not to be misunderstood as dismissive or irritative. This person has just endured a full day of questioning, and they just finally want to know who this person is that I have faith in. He says, please, just tell me. You can hear the anguish in his plea. Jesus honors this request and announces himself as the Son of Man. We are hearing this story in the context of Lent. And I believe it is all the more powerful with this context in mind. Lent is a time that we hear over and over again of introspection, of recognizing how our faith is shaken at our mortality and brokenness. But when I read this story with this in mind, the story blossoms and transforms into a very powerful message to us. I see a story of a person who was on the margins of society because of an illness, who was even more isolated, stigmatized, and interrogated when a miracle happened to them. I see a person whose faith was struggling even after a miracle happened to them directly. I see a person, I see this person being placed at the center of a story. During each faith statement from the person who experienced blindness, we see the faith of the person grow and transform in the midst of a chaotic environment. It starts with sheer doubt and expands to a full-blown confession of faith and a worship session. As Raymond Brown says, on one hand, this is a story of a person who sat in darkness all of their life, that was brought to the light not only physically, but spiritually. On the other hand, it is also a tale of those who thought they saw and therefore knew were blinding themselves to the light. This story is framed with a person who was born blind receiving their sight, and the story ends with those who have sight who are not able to see. If you ask me, the Pharisees aren't able to see at all. Even though we lie in waiting, unsure of ourselves, sitting in darkness, sitting in our own chaotic environment of interrogation, of doubt, of fear, this story calls us to remember that we can be used to tip the scales of society. Our faith is muddy. Our faith is not easy. But we are called by Jesus, just like the person who experienced blindness, to bear witness to a faith that is dynamic and to a faith that is inwardly and outwardly transformational. We are called to witness to the darkness of life with a new faith, with a new hope, and with the love of God on our hearts. And that is exactly what Lent is all about. Friends, let us designate our relationship with Jesus. Let us designate our relationship with God. Let us be transformed with the hopes of making a difference around us. And let it be so. Amen.